been into animal protection and had a love for animals since I was a child. I never expected to be a elected representative for them myself. And I consider veganism to be a political decision. It is, it's making a statement that you think something is wrong. I think there's a strong link between the two, and I think that animals and society would benefit more if people would acknowledge that link. And I'm confident that it will get us animal liberation someday. Maybe not in my lifetime, but I'm sure it'll happen.
Hi, Georgie. So thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me on.
No worries at all. So just for our viewers and listeners, especially in the UK, can you kind of just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Of course. So I'm Georgie Purcell. I'm an Animal Justice Party Member of Parliament in the state parliament in a state of Australia called Victoria. And my role is to pursue an animal protection agenda and change laws that benefit the lives of animals. I'm the youngest woman in the Victorian Parliament, and I'm the second Animal Justice Party MP to be elected in our state. And we have a number of other representatives around the country.
Amazing. That's such a, when did it all start for you? You said that, I think it was another interview where you mentioned you watched the film Babe initially, and that was like the catalyst to go vegetarian.
Yeah, so I've been into animal protection and had a love for animals since I was a child. I actually grew up in a small country farming town where one of the main employers was in animal agriculture. And I think you sort of go one of two ways when you grow up around that. You see the reality of it and you accept it, or you see the reality of it and you think it's wrong and you want to change it. And I certainly went the latter way. I was riding my bike down the highway. My parents were teaching me to ride my bike, and I just watched Babe. I was 4 years old, and I saw a truck full of pigs, and I asked them where they were going, and they were really honest with me, which I'm grateful for. That would have been in like 1996. I feel like it wasn't that common for parents to be open with their children about that stuff. We try and shield them from it. And I just said to them, I don't want to do that anymore. And they said, okay. And I've just stuck with it since, and went vegan when I was at university and joined the Animal Justice Party as a member because I believed in the work that they were doing when I was about 21, 22 years old. And never expected to be a elected representative for them myself.
No, that's amazing. Were your parents quite open to the, because you started activism at quite a young age, didn't you? You were quite prominent in your kind of teenage years, and were your parents really open to that, or?
Yeah, so they weren't opposed to it, but they also weren't, I guess, on board with it at the time. But it's been really cool to see the shift in my entire family along my own journey. So we have a completely vegan Christmas now, and most of my family are vegetarian, and I now have a little niece who's 3 years old who loves animals just as much as me. My family all say she's going to grow up and be like me. So they have been supportive of it, but I did get into activism quite young. I was sort of really out there and doing a lot of protests and things like that, and then I shifted to political advocacy as I went into my mid-20s, and obviously ended up doing it for a job.
Amazing. Yeah, because you have a background in like communications and law, don't you, as well? And so it makes kind of sense to move that into politics. It's kind of like natural trajectory, isn't it?
Yeah, I think all forms of animal activism are so important, and they complement each other and they work together. But I realised through all my activism that often the one thing we were asking for when we're out there protesting or, leafleting, or, crashing events was that we wanted the law to change. And the best way to do that is, of course, you should encourage existing decision makers to get on board and support you. But the most powerful way to do it is to get in there yourself and, be in the room where the decisions are made.
How was it for you when you were really, really young as well when you went into kind of politics? What was it like kind of stepping into that? I've seen a lot of the headlines I saw recently about the duck shooting, and I saw the kind of aftermath of that. So what you're up against is awful. You're up against quite a lot of misogyny. You're up against, laws that don't want to be changed. So yeah, how can you talk us through a little bit like what it was like going into that initially? And
Yeah, so I was chief of staff to the first Animal Justice Party MP to get elected in Victoria, and I was 26 years old when I started that job. Obviously, I'm young. I'm a little bit different. I'm covered head to toe in tattoos, and I certainly I certainly felt that Parliament probably wasn't a place for me or that reflected me. And throughout that process, I realised that I shouldn't just accept that we need to change it. And I never actually planned on running as a candidate myself, but I got really encouraged to do it by people around me that could see the passion for the work that I was doing, and that I was good at the work I was doing despite the perceptions about the people that are in politics. And so I ran when I was 30 and got elected when I was 30, and I'm now 31. I've been doing it for a year, but it certainly is a boys' club and remains to be a boys' club. We've done so much to make politics and our parliaments more welcoming and inclusive places for women, but we still have a really, really long way to go. I always say we might be allowed in there now, but we have to work twice as hard to get there. And then when we get there, we have to work twice as hard to prove that we belong, while also receiving commentary on how we look and how we dress, and, you know, whether, you know, you're more acceptable if you're a wife or if you're a mother, and, you know, can appeal to your community. So I'm really hoping that by being there and, you know, shaking it up a little bit and changing the face of politics, that it will help more, particularly young women, see that it can be a place for them as well.
No, that's amazing. And I think it's a worldwide problem. You know, in the UK, we had, I think it was Boris Johnson, or one of our MPs in like 2016 was like, sit down, keep quiet, you know, in terms of when a female member of parliament was stood up talking. And we have some great politicians like Zara Sultana, but, you know, they're not given the kind of voice. So I get the frustration, and I think it's worldwide, and it will change. And by having people like yourself, you know, advocating for that change, it's really interesting you say that, because I was literally just having this conversation with my staff the other day about how women are expected to act a certain way in politics. Men get away with everything, and it's accepted by the community. But I recently had a moment where I was really disappointed in the decision that the government made after they chose to continue duck shooting after initiating their own inquiry that recommended it be banned. We went through this really long parliamentary inquiry process. I was on the committee, but I had a clear recommendation and they rejected it. And I was so angry, and I spoke in the media and in public in a way that I hadn't before. And people were shocked and confronted by it. And we're talking about the way that women's rage is never justified, and that it's like we're not allowed to be angry, despite male politicians yelling and shouting and, you know, doing outrageous things all the time. The second that I showed any emotional passion, people were confronted by it. And I think that sort of is one of the more subtle and perverse ways in which we might not necessarily be fully accepted in the political world yet. I know it was a big blow as well with the duck shooting, the outcome from that, because like you say, obviously it had been recommended that it ended, you know, it was all there. We were following it as well over here. So I can imagine that was a bit of a kick. But how do you kind of like pick yourself up after? Cool.
So I get this question all the time, because one thing I say when you advocate for animals is that unfortunately you get used to losing, and you need to find a way to sustain, you know, this job and to keep on fighting and to keep on going for animals. So the most important thing to me is to celebrate the small wins, and we do have many of those. I've been in Parliament for a year, and even though we might not have got duck shooting banned a few weeks ago, and we'll continue the fight, we have achieved so much, and it's important to take stock and acknowledge those things. I'm really lucky that I live out in the country. I'm actually a country MP, which shocks people. I got elected into a regional seat where there's, you know, a lot of farming, and I think that really disproves this idea that country people don't care about animals. They do. It's not an inner city issue. It's not a hipster lefty issue. And I live on acreage, and I have a bunch of rescued animals. I have 15 sheep that I raised as orphans that almost died in Australian winters here. We lose about 15 million lambs per year to exposure every winter. So I've got a little flock, and what I like to do when I'm having a particularly hard day at work, or need to, I guess, check out is I spend time with my animals. And I really like it because it helps me check out, but it also helps me check back in because it reminds me who I'm fighting for and why I'm doing it and why it's so important to not give up.
I mean, you kind of got a little sanctuary going, haven't you, at yours? Is that you've got quite a lot of animals at this point?
Yeah, I've got 15 sheep, 3 horses, 3 dogs, and 4 cats. And I love to tell the story of my dogs because before I got elected to Parliament, I actually was president of an organisation here in Australia called Oscar's Law, and we campaigned for puppy farms to be banned. And Victoria, where I live, and I'm now in the Parliament, was the very first state to commit to doing that. And my 3 rescue dogs are actually a direct result of that legislation coming into effect, where a bunch of dogs had to be taken away from puppy farms and they now live with me. I actually had 4 up until only a few weeks ago. One of them sadly passed away, but she had 7 years of freedom outside of a puppy factory with me after spending her entire life in a cage on concrete, not knowing, she hadn't even walked on grass until she came here. So they're a really nice reminder of political progress for animals that I get to see every single morning when I wake up.
No, I'm really sorry about your dog. That's really sad. But I guess, it's like when you go to a sanctuary and you see the animals just after they've kind of come out of factory farms, and you can see them at first and they're a little bit scared and they're getting used to it. And then over time, like you go back a year later and they're like their actual weight they should be. And they're so much more confident. And it's it's so lovely to see that.
Yeah, I always say I'm unfortunately very hardened to seeing confronting things that happen to animals. Not that it doesn't upset me and not that I think it's okay or right, but not much shocks me anymore. But I always say the thing that makes me the most emotional is actually just seeing animals live the life that they should. I will, spend a day at work watching the most horrific footage that's investigators have just captured and consider it from my perspective of how I'm going to handle it at work. And then I'll go home and one of my sheep will, they do this thing where they run and jump and bounce when they're happy. And that's the thing that makes me emotional because it makes me think of all the animals who don't get to experience that. But it's so lovely to see them develop and progress in that way. It's a real honour to be part of it.
No, it's amazing. Now, in the UK, for example, the meat and the dairy industries are heavily subsidised by the government. Is that something that happens as well in Australia?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. There's this real idea in Australia, and I'm sure many other countries, that we were built off the back of farmers, and that and I guess it's really hard to have a critique of them that is not considered an attack or an insult. And even things here like the climate emergency, the state I live in is considered a very progressive state. We're doing lots on the climate emergency to try and reduce emissions, but everyone's too scared to talk about the impact that animal agriculture has or to put restrictions on animal agriculture because there's this fear about doing things to the farming industry. And I'm a very open book as a politician. I meet with farmers. I will talk to farmers. We actually often find more middle ground than people expect. But at the end of the day, we need to acknowledge the severe impact that they are having. And, we're in a cost of living crisis here. We're in a rental crisis. We're in, severe debt. And the farming industry continues to remain not only exempt, but often propped up. And that's the same here for racing industries as well.
Interesting. I mean, are you looking at working with farmers in a more kind of sustainable way, away from the animal side of things into different methods of farming or?
Yeah, well, what's really interesting is that I think that we are not only doing the environment and a broader community a disservice by ignoring this, but also farmers, because so often in conversations with them, they say, I don't want to do this anymore. It's not sustainable for me. It's harder to live on the land than ever before because of the unpredictable climate, and I want to get out. But they're not offered transition plans. And I think that we actually have to look at this in a serious way and acknowledge the problems, and the fact that many farmers themselves are coming to the table before the government does. So, you know, I have spoken to a number of farmers who are wanting to move away or have moved away. We have organisations here like Farm Transitions Australia that work with farmers on, you know, moving into another area of agriculture that might be more sustainable. I recently led a parliamentary inquiry of a committee that I'm chair of into the industrial hemp industry. And that's a really, you know, emerging industry here in Australia that hasn't developed as much, that is a great alternative for people involved in animal agriculture that can farm in a way that's sustainable and productive and a product that's needed.
No, that's amazing. And you're right, these are kind of measures that need to be taken, and it shouldn't have to be down to like the farmers themselves to come. It should be something like legislation that's led by politicians who are looking and realise what needs to be fixed.
That's right. And the reality is we move away from industries that are unsustainable all the time. And at some point, we're going to have to acknowledge that with animal agriculture, at least in some way. In Victoria, where I am, we're moving away from coal and gas. We're also moving away from native timber logging. They were huge industries that employed a lot of people, but the government acknowledged that it wasn't sustainable and the community acknowledged that it wasn't sustainable. And instead of burying their heads in the sand, they worked with the industry to come up with a transition to ensure that everyone had, you know, a just transition away from the industry and to move into employment. And I don't want it to get to the point where we're scrambling when it comes to animal agriculture.
No, that makes complete sense. I mean, do you see a kind of connection between veganism and then the kind of political ideologies? Do you see them as being kind of interlinked, or, you know, because it's...
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think I always say people often say to me when they ask me what I do, and I say I'm a politician, and I always say, and they'll say to me, I'm not really political, I'm not really into politics. And I always say every single decision we make is a political decision, whether we like to admit it or not. And I consider veganism to be a political decision. It is, you know, it's making a statement that you think something is wrong. And, you know, I think there's a strong link between the two. And I think that animals and society would benefit more if people would acknowledge that link. And I completely understand that people have, I guess, lost faith in politicians. Like, I've lost faith in politicians, and I am a politician. But the only way to change that is to change what, you know, politics looks like and the political statements that we're making.
No, I think that's a really good answer, actually. I feel like we're in a kind of weird shift at the moment. It's like all the old systems are kind of dying, and they're proving that they're not working, that they're not sustainable. You've got a lot of younger people, let's be honest, that are coming through who are like, this doesn't work for me. And it does look like there's going to be like a radical shake-up, you know, across industries, across just the working habits, across politics, across compassion and care about animals, war, everything. And it's quite a chaotic time right now.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And I am seen as, I guess, a little bit different and a unique individual in politics in Australia at the moment. But I think in a few years' time and after a few more elections, that will absolutely not be the case. In Australia, at our next election, we will have more millennial and Gen Z voters than any other generation. And I really think that's going to come through, and that we will be forced as a society to make radical change because of the people that are voting and the people that are entering politics. And I think that's a really, really good thing.
I really do as well. I think millennials and Gen Z are the first generations, not as they get older, to get increasingly more right-wing. It's a little bit more, but it's kind of staying slightly more to the left centre.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I read some research the other day to say the same thing, that millennials and Gen Z are less likely to become conservative as they get older, and that particularly young women are moving more to the left than any other cohort, and still, even with young men not keeping that pace, they're still more left than young men previous generations ago. So I think it's a good sign.
Yeah, let's stay hopeful for that one.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, I know that can you just, I know you mentioned you worked obviously for the Animal Justice Party. Can you tell us a little bit more about the kind of 3 levels of government that exist in Australia, and how that kind of plays into the democratic system? Just because we've got a lot of viewers from UK and America and things.
Yeah, of course. So we have, in Australia, we've got local government, and then we've got state government and federal government. And what I think is really cool is that all 3 levels of them, you can implement some really cool change no matter what level you're at. So I guess if you're in the federal parliament, that's overseeing, the entire country and the decisions made. And of course, other broader issues to do with the country, such as, international relations and defence and things like that. That's not the parliament that I'm in, but the Animal Justice Party is really striving to get a senator in the federal parliament because we could have impact on issues such as live export, which is a really big problem here, where we live ship animals to other countries to be slaughtered. And then we've got state parliament, and that's where I am. So that's overseeing Victoria, the state that we live in, and I'm in the upper house, it's called. That's a Senate equivalent of the federal parliament, where we're the House of Review. And what's really cool about being in there for me is that the government doesn't have a majority of seats in the upper house. So they rely on what's known as the crossbench, where I am, to pass their legislation. So it gives you a lot of power to negotiate with them. You're seen as quite powerful, and it gives more influence over the issues that you're campaigning on. At a state level, where I am, I have direct say over issues such as anything that affects animals that falls under state legislation. So that's animal racing, animal shooting, certain forms of agriculture, our state's animal protection laws and things like that. Then at local government level, that's obviously in council areas. The Animal Justice Party has a number of councillors, and that allows you to have a say on things like roads, local plans for wildlife, perhaps planning applications for things like factory farms or slaughterhouses, and whether or not they get approved. So there's great change, whether it's at a local level or a countrywide level, that can be implemented if you get elected as a representative for animals, no matter what one of the 3 it is.
Wow, that's amazing, actually. So there's a lot of sway throughout. I mean, that's quite unique, I think. Especially, yeah. I mean, we have like environmental over here, but it realistically it means nothing, and you're fighting to get a Green Party member in to be heard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's been really cool, I guess, to see the public and the animal protection community go on a journey about understanding the importance of having representatives for animals elected. Because for a little while, until it happened, there was sort of this narrative of like, what could one person possibly change? But the answer is actually a whole lot. In fact, more than some of the bigger parties that might not be in government. But because I'm in there on my own, but my one vote influences a lot of decisions, or whether or not legislation passes. And that comes with an enormous amount of power and responsibility, and gives you, a really good tool and mechanism for pressure and for change. And we've certainly proven that, as has other Animal Justice Party representatives in other states, and the former MP before me in the state parliament in Victoria.
Amazing. I wonder, do you think maybe because of that a level of power that you actually have, and that people are actually listening to what you say because it's legislative, do you think that's maybe why some of the backlash can kind of come at you from the press or certain papers who may disagree, should we put it nicely, with
Yeah, I think so, and it's been really it's been like a baptism by fire for me, and like a real learning curve, because I have been involved in the animal protection community for a really long time, but I was very much an organizer, not so much a spokesperson. I was always in the engine room. I was always doing, the prep and the organizing and the rallying. But seeing myself described by journalists as, prominent and powerful, or, key vote has been confronting for me. But I think it's a really cool demonstration of the way that we can have someone in there for animals, being seen as one of the most, I guess, prominent or powerful people in our parliaments, and the change we can bring about with that. And more than that, even more change we can bring about if we get more MPs elected.
No, it's absolutely incredible, and there needs to be more people like you. It's brilliant because animals are actually getting a voice. You know, it's not just lip service by politicians. You're actually implementing change, even if it can be slow or there's setbacks. It's, you know, like you say, it's happening.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And even if change isn't happening at the rate that we would like it to, even just having someone in there whose main focus is animals and is consistently talking about animals and is consistently being a voice for the advocacy groups and the activists and the whistleblowers and the investigators, it's really, I think, taken our movement up a notch, and it's resulting in us being taken more seriously, for sure.
No, that's amazing. I mean, how do you see the party as well kind of contributing to like the broader changes related to like animal welfare, veganism? Yeah, I mean, I know you advocated for Parliament to go meat-free, didn't you, at one point as well?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, when we were doing some climate work, and we said the Parliament should be meat-free as an acknowledgement to the impact animal agriculture has. That wasn't that popular. But there is actually a lot of vegetarians and vegan politicians. They're probably not just as open about it as me, and you know, it's not their main focus. But I think that we've had a really good contribution to both of those things. The other thing that I think that is important for me to stress is that there's this idea, particularly that comes from people who might care about animals but might not think that it should be our biggest political priority, is that even though I'm elected for animals, and that's my main focus, I, of course, vote and speak on many other things and, you know, am a tool for change on other issues. So I've been very, very vocal about my stance on increasing access to reproductive health care and abortion in Victoria, supporting the LGBTQI community. I work really closely with sex worker organisations. I used to be a stripper when I was at university, so, you know, I'm a real ally to them. And it's showing that we can, you know, walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm able to commentate on other issues and bring about change on other issues while also doing my animal advocacy work. And one doesn't take away from the other, but what it does do is bring in a whole other section of the community who feels loved and supported and represented. And then they start learning about animal things as well. And that's certainly been the experience for me, you know, on my social media and being out there as a public figure, is that I pick up different cohorts of society for different reasons. And then they start following me and supporting my work, and they learn about animals and become part of our community as well. And I think it's a really good example of why our veganism should be intersectional.
No, I think that's amazing. And you're right. I mean, you know, where to even begin with the things you've just talked about with in terms of healthcare, reproductive healthcare especially. You know, I know with, we won't go into it too much, but obviously there's such condemnation of trans people, you know, so the LGBTQI community needs all the support it can get at the moment. It's actually turning backwards, which is quite frightening.
Yeah.
In terms of legislation worldwide.
Yeah, it's been a really scary narrative that has picked up around the world. In Victoria, we've been really good at pushing back against it, but we certainly have people here that have that ideology. We have people in the Parliament where I am that have that ideology. We've done some really cool change in recent times to show our support and solidarity with the trans community. We brought in legislation that allowed trans and gender diverse people to change their sex on their birth certificate to represent who they truly are. We banned conversion therapies, or so-called conversion therapies. And we also made it illegal for schools to discriminate against LGBTQI staff, including private schools, which was not the law here until recently. So I feel really proud that in our state we're pushing back against it. But we also, you know, we need to be aware that it's happening, and that narrative and that rhetoric is certainly picking up in Australia as well. And our laws thankfully aren't going that way, but we can't ever be complacent about it.
No, I mean, that's incredible. A lot of people in the UK aren't even aware that conversion therapy is not banned here, which is terrifying. So no, it's great that you're pushing for all of these different issues. It's really amazing. I mean, like you kind of touched on it earlier as well. I mean, how in your opinion, how do you think that like can political influence be harnessed to create like lasting change for animals, like on a systematic level?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like I said earlier, many of the things that we're protesting about or campaigning about require a change in the law. That's the final thing to end it. And of course, like probably most people that listen to this podcast, I'm vegan, I'm abolitionist. I'll always be clear on that. And I know it's not for everyone, but I think pragmatic change is a really, really good thing. And if I can alleviate the suffering of animals while ultimately working to dismantle the industries that harm them, I will do that. So, you know, we're working on legislative change on things like sow stalls and battery cages. And while that might not be the silver bullet that fixes their suffering, I think it does bring about lifelong change. And, you know, it shines a light on the industry. It helps the public learn about it. And it does alleviate animals from some form of suffering. While also, as I said, acknowledging that at the end of the day, I'll never support these industries. But if I was an animal in that place, I know that I would want the least harm possible. And that's always the perspective that I take. But certainly there's other issues that I do think we can bring about change that shuts down industries completely. Like we almost just got duck shooting banned. I'm confident that we will. Greyhound racing is on its knees in Australia. And, you know, if we get that banned, that will truly bring about meaningful change for so many dogs. And, you know, same with horse racing. It's a big, rich industry here, as I know it is over there. But the narrative on that is starting to shift as well.
That's incredible. I mean, yeah, like, you know, having that representation for animals is crucial. I mean, you sound like you're in this for the long run. Do you think that, you know, you're going to continue to do politics long term? I mean, we all hope you do, but that's no pressure.
I think I'll always be a political activist for animals. My term in Parliament is up in November 2026. I will very likely contest the next election and try and get another 4 years, but elections are a wild beast and we have a very interesting voting system here in Victoria. But I'm hopeful that I'll get to do another term in Parliament because it goes very, very quickly and, you know, you can achieve so much doing it. So it would be such a loss to not be in there. At the end of the day, though, I just hope the Animal Justice Party does have someone in Parliament. But yes, my plan is to stay in politics if politics will have me.
I'm sure it might have no choice. For kind of individuals that are inspired by your work, you know, have you got any like advice that you can kind of give them, you know, for those people embarking on their own journey of activism or politics?
Yes. So my advice to this is always find your skill and the thing that you're good at and offer it up to the animal protection community. I think that so many people feel that they need to be a certain person or do a certain thing in order to be effective in animal protection, and that is just not long lasting. You're not going to have longevity doing that if it's not the thing that you love doing or that you're comfortable doing or that you're good at. And I know by being this person myself, sometimes the best operators and the people bringing about the most change are not the people out on the streets on the megaphone or handing out the leaflets, even though those people are amazing. They're the people doing data entry for organisations, they're the people doing graphic designs, they're the people writing submissions to parliamentary inquiries. So it's find the thing that you're good at and to offer that skill up. But the other thing that I would say is if you are an activist that is keen to get involved politically for animals, and particularly for young women, is that it can be incredibly daunting and scary, but to please give it a go, because we had so many people like me contest for Parliament and were unsuccessful, but it still built profile for our party. It still brought about change for animals. It still got us a foot in the door to negotiate and be part of the conversation. And then ultimately we got there. So it's a long road and change is slow, but don't give up. I've been doing this for a really long time now, and it's amazing to see how much we've grown and the different skills and diversity of people we have. And I'm confident that it will get us animal liberation someday. Maybe not in my lifetime, but I'm sure it'll happen.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking to us. Just before you go, Georgie, what have you kind of got planned for the next sort of 12 months?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I'm obviously still fighting duck shooting, which I wasn't expecting to be doing, but we'll be doing that. I'm about to commence a parliamentary inquiry, which I'm chair of, into pig welfare in Victoria. So we're going to be looking at CO2 gassing with the awful gassing cells to sun them, and forms of confinement and mutilation, such as, sow stalls, farrowing crates, tail docking and teeth clipping, and making some recommendations to the government and to the parliament about alternatives, or, whether it's the right thing to be doing. I'm focusing really, really heavily on ending greyhound racing. As I said, it's on its knees here and continues to suffer. And I do a lot of wildlife advocacy work for overseas listeners. In Australia, we treat our native animals that are tourism draw cards like shit. We shoot kangaroos. Koalas are constantly hit on the road. And, we have lots of other awful things that happen to them that the government approves, and they try to hide it from people. In Victoria, there is hundreds of thousands of kangaroos shot every year. We're trying to end that program. They're exported overseas and their skin is used for leather. So we've been tackling that, getting sports brands to pull out of using kangaroo leather. So that's going to be a really big focus for me this year as well. But my work is very, very reactive, and it's often dependent on what's going on in the activist space and what they're working on. And I work really closely with all the advocacy groups here too, and kept up to date with their investigations and the things that they're going to be working on. And then I apply it in a political context.
That's amazing. I mean, yeah, so much there. Do you get time to sleep? Or is that...
Not a whole lot.
No. Okay, excellent.
I love it though. I love it.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for chatting to me, Georgie. It's been an absolute pleasure, and honestly, good luck with everything. You've got so much on your plate, but yeah, keep going for it because it's essential.
Amazing. Thanks for having me on.
No, you're welcome.